right, just getting started. Okay, tap the screen, share the live, guys. Gonna get started here. All right, looks like we're live on Facebook now. All right, welcome everyone. Happy Saturday. Um, the topic for tonight is going to be finding the courage to change. And we're going to dive into different aspects of change and the process and all of those kind of things and the emotions that come with dealing with those changes. And so we're stay tuned with that. Tap the screen, share the live if you're on TikTok. And if you are on Facebook, type in hashtag live so I can see that you are here with us live. If you're catching the replay, type in hashtag replay. Okay, so change. Change is one of those things that is pretty freaking scary. And it can be really difficult. It brings up a whole lot of emotions. And the thing is change is pretty much the only thing that, other than death, that we can count on in life. And that's the biggest change. But as we go through life, we're going to go through a variety of changes, and a bunch of different things are going to happen. And sometimes there are physical changes, like when we go through puberty, some or menopause, or childbirth, or just any physical changes that we may end up having. We could have changes that are caused due to an accident or um, any kind of illness or anything like that. So being able to deal with those changes and the emotions that come up with those are a big part of just going through life. And sometimes those changes can be really, really painful and really difficult. And then, of course, there's also changes where we initiate those changes. And even though we're the ones that decide to say, hey, I want to change this thing about myself, or this thing about my environment, or change my job, or change my career, any of those kind of things. And those, even though we're the ones that are deciding to do those changes, they can become really, really scary. Um, and often, even when we're okay with those changes, we end up having external influences that try to get us to change back because they're not able to deal with the changes, and it brings up emotions in other people. So this is why it's so important to understand and do the inner work, because as you're going through, sorry, I had a bit of feedback there. As we're going through these changes, there are a variety of different emotions that'll come up, and fear gets triggered all of the time. And this is why it's important to understand what are the fears that are coming up for you, what's going on, what's the internal dialogue, all of those kind of things. Okay. Um, and as you're going through these changes, knowing how to support yourself through that, and also how to deal with other people and their emotions as they're dealing with adapting to these changes, right? So, say for instance, you one of the changes that I had went through in my early 20s, when I was going through therapy and recovery and stuff like that, I decided to start to make some physical changes. And one of those physical changes was I was a smoker, and I was smoking about 2 packs of cigarettes a day. And this was back at the time where you could actually smoke while you were in the office. So I probably didn't actually smoke that much, but there were a lot of times where I'd light a cigarette, set it down, and go off and do something else. And so making the change to quit smoking was a big change for me. And because it's not just the physical attributes of it, right? You know, you're like, oh, I can just quit smoking. There are all these other things that are tied to these particular habits that we have or whatever it is that we're trying to change. And there's also the identity shift that we have to make from being, I'm a smoker trying to quit, to I don't smoke, right? So making those identity shifts is a big part of the transition in order for the change to be successfully implemented. And so we had tried before several times, and then you start getting different stressors that end up happening in your life, and you get to this bucket point and you kind of say, you know what, just give me a cigarette, let me bum a cigarette from you, right? Because at first we and you have to have a strong reason why you're actually doing this. And there's a multitude of different things that actually can motivate you, and you understanding what truly motivates you is important. Because I know the first time I tried to quit smoking and was unsuccessful at it, it was because the price of cigarettes had gone up and it was just ridiculous to spend this amount of money, right? So my motivation for wanting to quit smoking was very financially driven. Well, that doesn't last too long. That wasn't a strong enough why for me to quit smoking. And then um, when I finally did quit smoking, there were four of us. We went for there was hypnosis that had come through our town, and there was an event at a hotel, and you could be hypnotized to quit smoking and lose weight. And we're like, hey, this would be great for all of us. And so four of the women in my family, my mom, my aunt, and my aunt's best friend, four of us, we went and we got hypnotized to quit smoking um, and to lose weight. So the losing weight did not work at all, not even a little. Um, but that wasn't our main focus. Our main focus and our main intention when we went in there was to actually quit smoking. Now, two of us ended up quitting smoking for good and never went back, and two of us did not. So, what was the difference? Well, environment definitely played a factor in the success of it, because my mom and I, we both quit smoking. We were in the same household, so we had some support. We had common goals. We had common desired outcomes. And we were actively working towards sticking with this chosen path. And so it was easier for us to stay with it. Where the other two, my aunt and her best friend, they were in households where there were still other smokers. So when they hit those frustrating fuck it kind of moments, it was too easy within reach for them to just say, you know what, just give me one of your cigarettes, or grab a drag. I just need a drag, right? And they would have a puff off of it. And so it was too easily accessible, and it was too right there for them to do it. So when they hit those stressful points, they didn't have support. They had support to change back to their old behaviors, because when they were feeling irritated and cranky and their fear triggers were kicked in, and they didn't have a new tool to replace that old coping mechanism, um, they it, they became irritable, they became cranky and miserable, and everybody around them just like, will you just have a fucking cigarette? Like, you're just a pain in the ass right now. So this same thing happened when my grandfather tried to quit drinking. My grandmother, who wanted him to quit drinking so badly, actually ended up getting frustrated with him and making him a drink, because he was so irritable and cranky about the whole thing. And and this is where environmental factors end up coming into play as to why change can be so difficult. So, when you're doing change management, like in business, this is why the messaging, the communication is huge, and it's so important to be able to reinforce and stress the importance of why the change is actually being made. So, in this situation where I was able to stick with the change of quitting smoking, it was because I was in an environment, it wasn't easily accessible. So, in order for me to actually um, smoke, I would actually have to get in my car, go to the store, buy that stuff. And there was enough of a time delay in there to make it inconvenient for me to just react and grab for that old coping mechanism. So, this is why it was easy for me to be successful. Also, at work, there were a bunch of people that I actually admired and a group that I was hanging around with, and they absolutely could not stand people that smoked. So that made it really easy for me. So I had some peer pressure of people that I respected to that they didn't like smoking behavior. They just thought it was disgusting and it was dirty and all of this kind of stuff. And they were vocal about it as well. So it's like, oh, okay, this is using peer pressure in a positive way to make sure that I surround myself with people that have the same beliefs as me. So when we are making changes in our lives, we have to surround ourselves and even if we can't surround ourselves with, at least making sure that the media we consume, the stuff we read, the energies that we hang out with, they are aligned with the goals that we are actually trying to achieve. Otherwise, it will be too easy to just default back and you'll find yourself having to white knuckle things, and that's based on willpower. And willpower is a limited resource that you will eventually run out of. You will cave, you will bow down to other ways. So, in order to make change successful, you have to put things in place that will actually support the change and also understand what kind of things actually weaken your um, your tolerance and add resistance to making it harder for you to actually stick with those changes. So things like I found there were certain habits, like when I would have my coffee in the morning, that I would reach for my cigarettes. So one of the things that I did is I took and I replaced it with these cinnamon flavored toothpicks. And so at least I had some sort of like a the physical habit of that oral fixation, right? Of putting the cigarette to my mouth and being able to have some sort of tangible physical thing that I could replace it with. Now, this was a temporary measure that I ended up doing just to kind of get me over the hard parts. And that was a good transition for me. I also ended up doing other things of like finding like different things, and this was before fidget spinners, but I had like different things that I would play with in my hand, like a pen or you know we didn't even have cell phones back then. Most people didn't have cell phones. Only the rich people, they had car phones or the fancy business ones and or pagers. Oh boy. Sorry. So those are different things that I would do to kind of ease that transition to figure out what I needed to do. So also, it got to the point where I could actually still go out with other people that were having a cigarette because I wanted the social interaction. And so that allowed me to still partake in the social interaction without actually smoking. And at first, people were really uncomfortable with it because they're like, "Oh, don't you want to smoke? Then why are you out here with us?" I'm like, "Because I used to smoke and I like being able to chat with you guys and I want to hang out." And so, and plus, that was where I got most of the feedback of what was going on within different departments. And sometimes you could solve a lot of problems just by socializing and going out with the smokers. So, I did that kind of stuff a lot. And of course, as a non smoker, guess what? All of the smoke blows in your face. So, going through those different changes were things that I was okay with, right? Um, and oh, one of the other things, another physical change that I would do is after meals, the natural reaction or the not the natural reaction, the programmed habit that I had was I wanted a cigarette after I had finished eating, right? So one of the things that I started to do was I would go and I would brush my teeth and floss my teeth after I finished eating, and I got into the habit. So I replaced the old negative habit with a positive habit, and that actually ended up being a win-win. So always, you know, if you're trying to take something away, make sure you replace it with something else, something that's a positive upgrade to your habit, right? But still gives you the distraction of being able to do something afterwards, right? Or aligning it, right? So yeah. Hey, Mimi. Good to see you. Good to see you on here. Happy Easter coming up soon here. I saw your Easter eggs. So, as you're going through this, when you start making changes, identify where you're going to hit roadblocks, where you're going to hit challenges, or where you're finding that you're having to dig in, white knuckle, and use willpower. And knowing that if you are using willpower, that is a very limited resource. So you're going to have to find something else to distract you long enough for this new way of being, this new identity to take hold as who you are. And it now becomes so ingrained, it's not something that you actually have to think about. I don't have to think whether or not I want to smoke. And it doesn't bother me if I'm around smokers. And the last thing I never wanted to be was one of those reformed smokers that were terrible. And it's like, when you become the one that quit smoking and now you try to convert everybody else to quit smoking. It's like, no, because the changes that are forced upon us are the changes that are least likely to stick. It's the changes that we ourselves decide that we want to make. So allowing other people to still go down their paths is one of the hardest things, especially if you started to feel some really good benefits to your new way of being. And of course, all you want to do is share that good news with everybody else. And guess what? People don't like that. When they're not ready to change, if you step on the toes of others, they will retaliate, right? So it's a matter of understanding that even if you are really excited about this change and this is the best thing since sliced bread and everybody else should do this, people are not going to share your enthusiasm. They have a hard enough time with the fact that you are making this change, and that brings up all these uncomfortable feelings within themselves that they now have to process. And if they weren't ready for that, they may lash out, they may attack you, they may try to get you to change back and be the way that you used to be, right? And So be patient with people that are around you, because what you have to understand is, as you've see, the hardest part of change isn't the action, the actual change that you start to make. Hey, Saeed, welcome. It's not the actual change and that process. That's one part of it. But the biggest part and the hardest part of change is the process before you actually make the decision to change. Because this is the phase where you are in and out of this denial phase, where I'm doing well, Saeed. Thank you for asking. How are you? So it's that phasing in and out of that denial space where you're like, I know I kind of need to make this change, but it's too hard. It's too this, it's too that. I'm not sure I want to do that. Oh, maybe I'll do that. I'll start on Monday, or I'll start after my birthday, or I'll start after Christmas, or once the kids are back in school, or da 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 da. We have all these ways that we're trying to. Your voice, you can't hear me? Oh no, you're not able to hear me on TikTok. Well, shit. Let me try the other earbud and see if that works. No, there we go. See if this helps. Is that better? Can you hear me now? 20 minutes in. So it's that denial phase that we're actually going through before we decide to make the change. And when we decide to actually make the change, sometimes we don't have a strong enough why. And if we don't have a strong enough why, then that will, when we start to hit those resistance pieces, it will pull us back into old behaviors. Now, that doesn't mean that necessarily the change hasn't taken place. This just means you may have to activate more willpower, and you'll have to start to look at different habits or structures that you can put in place to add to support, to give more love and alleviate some of those fears of why you find it difficult to make these changes. You have to start to uncover why, what are the resistances, what are the fears that are coming up that are causing people to A, want you to change back, B, you wanting to change back because now you're like, well, I don't know how to be. Like, it feels awkward if I go out with the other smokers and just stand there and everybody else is smoking and they kind of feel weird about it. So you have to kind of get through that transition phase and get through this new way of being until it becomes that identity, right? Your new way of operating, where it's so ingrained you don't actually have to think about it. And it's much easier if you're making a smaller change to do that. When you're making a larger change, and this is a life changing one, sometimes you have to do what they call changing your playground and your playmates. So, say you are going to the gym, working out, and you're eating healthy, and you've made this change, and you're like, no, this is like something I have to do. I definitely am anchored in as to why I need to do that. Maybe you had a health scare, maybe there's something else going on for you that it's really, really important. And as long as that why is strong enough, it will keep you anchored in and keep you on the path even when you hit these challenging parts. So now that doesn't mean you're not going to make mistakes along the way, that you're not going to hit roadblocks and you're not going to have doubts as to whether or not you can actually make this change. This is where it's going to be important for you to be able to understand why you're making that change, looking at the fears of what's coming up for you. And this may mean you have to look at some old patterns. You have to um, maybe even do some visualizations and manifestations too of imagining what it's going to be like when this change is complete, when you've gotten to the other side where it's not even an issue for you anymore, that this is just your new way of being, and staying anchored in that future version of yourself where you are okay with this new way of being and this is just how you are, right? Um, so, and you can leverage different things. So you can leverage different things of like, and even as I was going through my journey of quitting smoking, right? So when I quit smoking, I did have access. Somebody had left a pack of cigarettes at the house. And that, oh, see that easy access, that's where that'll be a killer for you, right? Having the easy access. So, and of course, there was something that happened, there was a stressor, and I had that fuck it moment, I don't care, and pay attention to those kind of things. That when you get in that stressed, angry, fearful state, and you have that fuck it moment and the I don't care, if you can do something to buy yourself some time, to give yourself some space before you take that next action, because there is, and as you go through enough failures, you will see that there was a deciding point that in your mind you made a choice to say, you know what, fuck it, I don't care. I'm just going to do this, right? And when you do that and you start to pay attention to that, and every time that you mess up, you rewind and you kind of look for that time where you just said, I don't care, right? That is your early warning sign. That is your red flag that you need to stop what you're doing, buy yourself some time, get some space, put some distance, whatever it is that you need to do before you take that next step, right? Because that is where you're going to feel the most regret. You're going to feel that disappointment with yourself. And sometimes you have to fail enough and you have to feel that disappointment, that frustration, that anger with yourself to kind of get to the point. It's like, you know what? I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I'm tired of still repeating the same old pattern, and nobody else can decide when you have truly had enough of that pain, right? And unfortunately, for some of us that have gone through a lot of pain in our lives, we have this freakishly high level of tolerance. And we have this thick skin, thick skull kind of mentality where it's just going to be beating the shit into us before we actually make that final change, that transition, and we no longer jump back to the old ways. And know that as long as you keep getting up, you keep pushing forward, that eventually you will cross that threshold where you now no longer need to go back to your old ways. That you've done this enough times that this new way of being is just now who you are. And you don't feel the need to go back and connect with your old self, the one that was operating in that old way. So now these are changes, like I said, are the ones that we have initiated for ourselves, that it is important enough for us to stick with whatever pain that we have to endure to get through. Because trust me, there's a lot of pain to break through that barrier of this new way of being. and not being learning to not be afraid of that pain, learning to be able to look at whatever the fears are that are coming up for us and know that they are false evidence appearing real, to support ourselves by giving ourselves whatever love and support and um, guidance that we need in order to make those changes is going to be really, really important for you to be able to do this. This is no different than whether it's a personal change that you're making or if you're making a professional change. So, if you're making a professional change, definitely one of the first things, like if you're in a business or something like that, and you're going to make a change. Now, if it's a small change, it's usually not too big a deal. There has to be some sort of awareness of why the change needs to be done. You have to create some desire within the team of understanding why this is going to be a good thing for us to go through the challenges that are going to come up for making these changes. Making sure that everybody has the knowledge of what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, what the changes are going to impact, who that's going to impact, what potential fallouts are going to be, where they go. Instead of doing this old thing, they now do this new thing, whether it's a new system, what tools do they need, what kind of communication needs to be done around this change. Um, and then making sure that once the change has actually been initiated, that everybody has the ability to do their part, their role, they're clearer and they understand what it is that they need to do to facilitate the change to the new way, and then reinforcing through positive affirmation, rewarding the correct behaviors, the correct habits, celebrating those changes and those milestones to making sure that that change is actually implemented and it is actually successful. Those are the things that you need to be able to walk everybody through, and communication, ongoing communication, and leadership demonstrating the value of that change. The worst thing that you can have is leadership not being resistant to that change. That means the leadership, whatever level of leadership, they're not fully bought in. They don't have a clear understanding of the why. And if the leadership is actually resistant to the change, then um, A, they're afraid of what the change is going to bring for them, or B, um, they aren't clear as to why the change is so important. And that ends up trickling down to everybody that rolls up underneath them. So, making sure that there's communication from the higher levels of leadership, because everybody is looking to them to say yay or nay, thumbs up or thumbs down as to this is the right direction to go. And the people that are below that are actually executing on the changes that are required, they have some way to be able to communicate if there are challenges that have come up because of these changes that maybe weren't made aware of. And they communication is so important, and being able to understand this. And this is important whether you're doing this as a personal change or professional change. If you're doing it as a personal change and having the communication, that feedback loop of understanding what kind of resistances and what kind of support do you need to make it through this next level of change. Same thing in a business, except now you have more people that are involved and they need to be able to have channels of communication that flow back up to leadership to say, hey, we made these changes, but now these new problems have come up and we don't know how to deal with these things, and it's causing resistance for us to be able to implement this change that you want. Being able to be seen and heard and understood is so important in this change process, because If they don't have that, then they're going to sabotage, not deliberately, but they're going to have a lot of resistance and they're going to pull back and they're not going to be fully bought into why this change is important. Plus, if you don't have that communication channels, you could end up not getting the appropriate feedback necessary in order to say, hey, we actually need to make a different change now, or we have to pivot in this other way because if we don't, it's going to cause these other fallout problems that are going to have huge impact on the business, right? And I've seen this in system implementations where um, things were not properly communicated. The change was executed, and then it ended up having to roll back the systems, which is so painful. Why? Because we didn't have the proper communication channels and the proper feedback, and the people fully invested and bought in. Why? Because they felt like they weren't being heard, understood, or listened to in what challenges they were facing. So if you're trying to ram a change through and force it down people's throats without being able to get a true buy-in, you're going to have an extreme amount of unnecessary resistance, and that resistance can be overt, where people are very, very vocal, where that's actually a blessing. If your team, your customers, any of that, they're actively bitching about stuff, that's still a good thing. You still have a chance to actually fix things. It's when things go silent and people are just nodding their heads and saying, yep, sure, whatever you say, and then they go back to their desk and they do whatever the fuck they want to do. They've stopped talking to you, and now you have a bigger problem to deal with. And that is going to make the change even more difficult. So having people that are around that can help facilitate those changes, that um, create an environment of trust and openness and understanding and communication, and being able to talk those things through is going to be super valuable, because I've seen a lot of money wasted in systems because proper people weren't engaged, proper communication wasn't available, people didn't feel heard, didn't feel understood. They felt like the change was being forced upon them instead of feeling like they were part of that decision, part of and understanding their role in why this change is going to be so valuable. And of course, some changes, it's more difficult to get that buy-in, especially when people know that, hey, this new system that's going to be implemented, it's going to result in a lot of people losing their jobs, right? Now, there's different ways that you can still mitigate those changes as well and have a successful transition by being open and transparent and still facilitating support and giving them a reason of why they still want to buy into implementing this change, right? And so I've seen that within companies and participated in this as well, of making sure that even if their role was eliminated, that they would have some sort of bonus if they stuck it out and stayed till the end of the transition. Um, some people do, some people don't. Um, others of knowing that, hey, yes, your role is being eliminated, but we are moving you over to this. So we are going to give you additional training to help you transition to this new role. That is another way to gain buy-in from people, of making sure that they stick with the change, even though it's not a desired outcome that they were hoping for, but allowing them and facilitating the process of them being able to change into a new way of being, right? And doing that in a way that is not punitive, that is not critical of them, supports them, understands their feelings in the process, but understanding that this change still has to happen is really important. And knowing that there's no bad guy in the situation, kind of thing. So operating from that kind of perspective um, really eliminates the fear reactions that happen, and still allowing, if those fear reactions do come up, listening to them, helping facilitate them through that process, regardless of how many times it comes up, knowing that, and us managing our own fear around that, our own guilt about the situation, and helping them through, even though we can't change that this is the way things need to go, right? So those can be challenging things to do when you are dealing with change, but it's important how we manage change. And I can promise you the biggest component is going to be that communication around change. Even when it's our own personal change, when we start to audit the voice in our own head, is our voice telling us how hard this is, how much this sucks? I can't do this forever. This is driving me crazy. Are we saying those kind of things to ourselves? Because that, I can promise you, is going to make it so much harder for us to be able to implement that change and stick with the change if we are adding all this additional weight to ourselves. If we change the dialogue to be something that would be more supportive and maybe even gives us an out. So I don't know how many times that I've done this with myself. That carrot, like the donkey with the carrot, of like, I would tell myself, it's like, you know what? You can have that cigarette. You know what? Don't worry about it. Just get through this, and then after we finish doing this task, then we are going to go hop in the car, we're going to go buy a pack of smokes, and we're just going to say fuck it, we're going to have a cigarette, right? And I did that many, many times, of like just trying to add some delay, giving myself some sort of reward or something to look forward to, of like, hey, you know what, I'm going to, if I, or I bribe myself with something. It's like, okay, well, I can have that thing if I give up. It's like, okay, do you want ice cream after dinner, or do you want to go have that smoke? And I'd be like, oh, I kind of really want that chocolate ice cream. So, okay, you know what? So give yourself something that you want more than the thing that you're trying to avoid or change, right? So those are some tips or tricks that I've used in my personal life as well. And knowing that change is hard, but if it becomes easier if we know why the change is valuable. And if we've made a lot of mistakes and we change back to our old behaviors, that doesn't mean that we can't still try again and move forward and find a deeper reason why. It just means that we need to find the reason why it's going to be worth it to make the change, because there is going to be pain either way. Whether we make this change or whether we stay the way that we were before we made the change, um, it's just a matter of, is it going to be worth it? And so sometimes that could be why we pull back, is we're like, oh, I don't know. Is it going to be worth it? Who am I going to be when I become this different person, this new way of being, a non-smoker? What's that going to look like? I don't even know, because I've been this way for so long, right? And the longer we have been away and operated in a certain way, and also, the more times that we've attempted this change and have been unsuccessful, it does add a level of complexity and additional work that needs to be done in order for the change to actually take root. So this happens a lot in business too, is like, the manager is like, this system, we're going to put this system in, everything's going to be great, and we're going to have all these amazing results and everything's going to be wonderful. And you've gone through like four different systems with this company in 10 years and it's all been shit. There's always been, maybe a few things get better, but then there's these other things that end up making, so yeah, we got some improvements, but now there's all these other new pain in the ass things that we didn't have before because we made this change. And sometimes that is what causes people to be afraid because, so for example, with quitting smoking, yes, I quit smoking and that was a healthy change and my breathing was great. My mom, she quit smoking. She stopped getting bronchitis every time she got a cold, which is a great health change of not no longer smoking. However, we put on weight. That was a negative consequence of the change happening. So we ended up getting a little too snacky snacks with with the quitting smoking. And sometimes this happens. I've seen this with other people too. They quit drinking. They end up putting on weight. I've seen people they try to give up their gaming addiction and then they just find a different addiction to replace it with. Now, this is why it's important when you make changes that you find something better to replace it with, because you can't take something away without replacing it, because um, that ineffective process was in there for a reason. We operated that way for a reason, and if we don't acknowledge the reason why we had that process in place before we change it, then we could end up causing more problems. And I've seen this in systems many, many times where you'll fix one thing and then 20 other things break, and you're like, mm, right? So it's important to understand before you make changes what are going to be the impacts to those changes. And the more people that are involved, the more you have to get that feedback and solicit and start that communication process before the change is actually made. There's got to be a lot of discussion happening, right? So now, if it's just you and you're just changing something for yourself, by all means, I've ripped the band-aid off and said, okay, I heard this piece of information. This was the missing piece of why I need to make this change, and boom, just go ahead and do it. And I can stick with that. Don't have to talk with anybody. Don't have to consult with anybody. Those ones are the easiest ones. However, even though those ones are easy, what you're going to get is you're going to get people around you in your environment that become uncomfortable with the change, even if they wanted that change to happen. And then they're going to get you to try and change back to your old ways. And they're going to test you. And not that they're doing this consciously. Most people are not doing this consciously. Um, and we're like, well, I wanted this part of the change, but I didn't want you to do this, right? I wasn't expecting you to be so moody about, making this change. And um, so, like, when my mom and I, we quit smoking and we didn't have these new coping mechanisms, these new tools in place. And so we got an itsy bit bitchy. And I remember this one time my mom was coming from the kitchen and she was going through the hallway and I was coming out of my bedroom and my brother was coming out of his bedroom and we were just kind of nattering at each other, bitching away. And it ended up that my brother is like had to come out and like blow the referee whistle and go, all right, you two, back to your corners, get back. And we realized what it was is because we were still battling the cravings of wanting the cigarettes and dealing with the habitual side of the addiction, right? And so this is when I started to realize, okay, I need something to replace it. And that's when I implemented the cinnamon flavored toothpicks, right, as some sort of way of dealing with that. So just know that even as we go to change, and these are positive change, and even if all the people around us wanted us to make these change, as soon as it becomes uncomfortable or difficult, like maybe you change eating and you decide that you want to go vegan, and everybody else around you is still eating meat, and they're like looking at you like, sure you don't want a cheeseburger? Come on, here, have this, right? Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. You're just a vegisaurus now, right? And there's all kinds of things that end up happening when you make different changes. And just know that the amount of time it took you to get to that point where you were in and out of your denial phase of why it's really truly important for you to make this change, however long that curve was for you, allow the people around you that same amount of time to adjust to the new you, your new way of behaving, and as long as you're staying consistent with it. Because every time you go back to the old ways, they'll be like, see, I knew. And then it's like, yeah, don't give up 5 minutes before the miracle happens, right? Because the pressure is the hardest. It's like trying to push your hand through saran wrap. Imagine how much tension is there as you're pushing through the saran wrap. It's stretched too. And if you stop before you break through, it's now stretched out of whack. And it makes it harder when you try to stretch again and go through all of that all over again. So try as much as you can to stick with it, even if it's painful, even if it's hard. Um, and if you do stop, you go back to the old ways, do not beat yourself up. Make sure that you give yourself love, support, kindness, appreciation to try again, because beating yourself up will delay the length of time before you try again. And I promise you, you will try again, whether it's trying to quit smoking, losing weight, changing jobs, career, uh, relationships, any of those kind of things, whatever you're trying to change in your life, if you stop before you are successful with that, implementing that change, beating up on yourself is one of the worst things. And I know, it's so easy to go down that path, and I've done that many times. So monitor how you're talking to yourself and shift those things from statements to questions so that you can be supportive and look for solutions to keep you moving forward. So, um, yeah. So change and finding that courage to change is all a matter of, sometimes we do have to white knuckle it, but know that if we are white knuckling it through this process, that is a limited window. You only have so much energy before you will slide back into old behaviors. So set your environment up to support you in whatever way that you can. If you're making big changes, make sure you're getting lots of rest, you're eating good, healthy food, because know that even if these changes are emotional or they are psychological, and they're not physical changes like doing healing work, um, you still need to support yourself and know that there is a physical, energetic toll on you. So supporting your body, supporting your mind, supporting you um, emotionally, and making sure that you have that support as you go through these changes is really important and crucial. And I know this is one of the things that we communicated, and we had to make sure that we were putting up posters and flyers and email communications within the business to remind people that when we were going through, hey, the system's going to be implemented, it's going to be live next week, this is the go live date, this is when we're executing everything. So I want to make sure that the week before that everybody has had some de-stress time, because we're going to have to put a lot of focus, a lot of energy on implementing these changes coming up. Make sure you get a lot of rest this weekend because come Monday we're going to be doing XYZ. And these are the things. So we had to ramp up our communication. We had to ramp up the support before the change was implemented, and then continue that change, that support after the change was implemented. And we had certain milestones and markers and rewards and all of that kind of stuff to make sure it kept everybody motivated and moving along and a little bit more comfortable with the pain that change brings. It's worth it in the long run, though. And making sure that they were receiving the kudos for the hard work that goes into change. So, even if you're doing this as a personal change, make sure that you are giving yourself the praise, the kudos, the acknowledgement of the work that you are actually putting in to make these changes, because these things are not easy. And recognizing that it's not easy is part of the process. So make sure you give yourself that validation of, you know what, this has been hard. It's okay that I screwed up on this part, but man, I really knocked this part out of the park and I did really well. Or, you know what, yeah, you know what, I made that mistake yesterday, but I picked it right back up today and I'm back on game. So don't be so hard on yourself as you're going through this process of change. Um, we will go through many, many changes in our life, and it's really important to be kind to ourselves and kind to the people around us as we go through these changes. So, guys, with that, if you hopped in late, I will be uploading the replay on my YouTube channel. You can check me out there. Coach Tina B 125 on YouTube. Please, I would love it if you would go over there and like and subscribe. And I will be back on again tomorrow. And if you like this, let me know if there's any particular things that you would like me to do a training on, anything that you're struggling with, let me know and I'd be happy to do a training on that. Okay? All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. Have a great night and we will see you again tomorrow. Bye.